Well, as we continue to be under quarantine, and so many of us are around the world and around the country are under stay-at-home orders, it is very easy to get captive to negative thoughts and negative attitudes, isn't it? Right? If you're like me, there are days where things are going well, you feel emotionally good and mentally good, and not as worried about the future as you might think you should be. And then there's other days where you're just completely overwhelmed with it all. There's days where just emotionally it's too hard and too heavy. There's times where we just feel captivated by fear and worry about the future and the next day, fear and worry about all the uncertainty and what's going to happen next. And we can feel captives both emotionally and a little bit physically because, well, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And so it can weigh on our hearts and minds, feeling this sense of being stuck. And there's this interesting and beautiful verse in the Old Testament book of Zechariah where God describes his people as being prisoners or captives. And the wordplay that he's doing here is the fact that they literally were captives and they were prisoners, and they were going through an incredibly difficult time in their history, and they were hurting and suffering. They're crying out to God for rescue, much like we are today, where we're going through difficult times. People are struggling and hurting. We're captive to fear and anxiety about the future and uncertainty, and we're crying out and we're praying to God to rescue us and to restore us and to be with us. And so in Zechariah, God calls his people captives, but he describes them in a different way. He doesn't say, hey, you're prisoners and you're captives to this moment and to these hard times. He describes them in a really beautiful way. In Zechariah chapter 9, he calls them captives of hope, and he even commands them, return to your stronghold, O prisoners, or captives of hope. And I've always been enamored with that verse and that word from God where he says that we are captives of hope. And so my question for you today is, what are you captive to in your heart and mind? Are you captive to fear and worry today? Are you captive to anxiety about the future and all the uncertainties that feel like there are there right now? Or are you going to be captive to God's word? Are you going to be captive to God's promises? And the reason God describes his people like this is because he promises later on in Zechariah 9 to restore them and to bring them home and to give them rescue. And as for Christians, this passage is especially meaningful because Zechariah chapter 9 is a passage that describes what God is going to do for his people in Jesus, that he is going to come as a rescuing king who's going to restore his people and bring them out of their troubles. So my encouragement to you this morning is that whenever you feel overwhelmed and captive to negative thoughts and worry and fears about the future, that you would pray to God, that you would turn to him and remember that you are captive, you are held prisoner by hope, a hope that is found in Jesus and his love for you and his salvation for you. God's peace.